So welcome back everyone to Ethics TV. I'm Jonathan, joined by Bryan DeBois, and the bio of whom you can see beneath this video if you're watching. If you're listening on Apple or Spotify, then you can read that in the description and the links as well to his LinkedIn and his organization's X and website. So without further ado, Bryan, thank you so much for joining. What is keeping you busy and excited right now in your space?
Yeah, Jonathan. As your viewers will have seen, I'm the director of industrial AI at a company that focuses on consulting and automation and engineering projects for manufacturing and industrial customers. So ultimately, my goal is to bring AI, artificial intelligence, to those manufacturing and industrial customers that are so important in the world that I really believe, manufacturing is kind of the lifeblood of any economy, of society. And so my goal is to bring AI to that world. And I will say that that is a world, manufacturing, that is notoriously kind of behind the times. And there's good reasons for that, which we can talk about. They're very risk averse. But because of that, whereas most of the world has adopted AI or is in the process of adopting AI, manufacturing is a lot more hesitant. And so, a big part of my job then in introducing AI to these manufacturing customers is really education, and getting them comfortable with the idea of ML models being an integral part of the plant floor.
Okay, and so how long would you say this maturation has taken to kind of this to become an actual topic in manufacturing? Because I can imagine some people listening to this will go, hold a minute, this is what's AI got to do with the manufacturing? Surely it's all about ChatGPT. Where's this whole supply chain stuff come from? So has this been
Yeah.
a gradual process or a quite rapid one?
Well, it's interesting. So one of the things that I try to break the narrative around, and I feel like we're an independent, what we call system integrator in this space, right? And so I think one of the roles of an independent system integrator, we're not tied to any one platform. We work with all the different platforms and vendors. So I think part of our role is to kind of break through the hype. And so one of the things that I talk to them about is that AI is the newest tool, and it's a cool tool and it's a very capable tool, but it is just another tool in the toolbox. And if we look back along the history of manufacturing, it's actually been a very innovative history. If you look back, from the adoption of pneumatics and then the adoption of transistors, all the way through to, my 25 years in this space, I've seen from where, at the beginning of my career, we were still doing a lot of custom software. They were just at the very end of still like soldering boards still. Now, you don't solder anything anymore. I mean, you can buy any of the components you need. You can buy a lot of the software that we were writing custom. You can buy off the shelf now, and now we're just customizing that. And so it's gone through this progression as we've seen through all of technology. It's gone through this progression. And the adoption. One of the things that I compare this to, though, is that we've always had analytics. We've always had a certain amount of modeling in the manufacturing industry. We've even had simulation. If you look at chemical simulation and fluid dynamics, I mean, when you look at the innovations that happen in manufacturing and how do we produce things so fast now and of such high quality, so many of those innovations came from the advancement of a lot of these technologies that now we kind of lump under the term AI. And so it really is a much more of an evolution than a revolution. That being said, there's no question that ChatGPT took us, November of 2022 was the launch of ChatGPT. And before that point, outside of a small group of LLM researchers, no one had even heard of large language models. No one knew of generative AI. And now suddenly that definitely launched us into a new era. That being said, one of the things that we can talk about today is there's a type of AI that we use in our world called autonomous AI that is more focused on solving operational problems that we see on the plant floor than the type of knowledge problems that generative AI is good at. And so we actually are oftentimes working at a different level and kind of using a different type of AI than generative AI on the plant floor.
And that's interesting because I'm wondering whether there's many people that understand the difference between the two and the and I would imagine that from the supply chain perspective, autonomous AI has been around probably longer than
It has.
the generative discursive stuff.
Hmm.
And I've always been amazed at how long these systems have been not only tested but integrated to a fundamental level. I mean, you've been where you're at RoviSys for a couple of decades, right? How long has the autonomous AI systems been involved in your couple of decades there?
Yeah. So, well, to answer that, you kind of have to look back at where autonomous AI came from. And really, it came from deep reinforcement learning, which was an advancement that came from a company called DeepMind. So that was around 2015, 2016. It was a Google spin-off company, and they specifically were created to develop a new type of algorithm. In a lot of ways, the story of OpenAI, remember how it was created to kind of create LLMs. In a lot of ways, the company had this vision. um, um, they were created to create this learning algorithm, and so it was called deep reinforcement learning. And what they found was that deep reinforcement learning was able to create human like decisions. It was able to create causal connections, understand causal connections, and learn those causal connections in the same way that humans can. And so that sets it apart from all other AI, including generative AI. So generative AI has been proven not to be able to reason about things, whereas autonomous AI can actually reason, understand causal connections, and work towards a goal. And so autonomous AI started out, if you remember, AlphaGo and AlphaZero and
Mm,
AlphaStar. So these were these deep reinforcement learning programs that were effectively just given the rules of the game and set loose to play against themselves,
mm,
and then slowly, iteratively got progressively better, until they were able to master those games and beat grandmasters at Go and chess and StarCraft. Um, so then they took, some enterprising folks then took that and said, we could apply it not just to playing games, but we could apply it to the problems we see in the industrial space. And so that's kind of how that all got started. And then it got brought under Microsoft Research, and then Microsoft Research divested that around the time when they kind of went all in on ChatGPT. But we still, find a ton of value in that, and we are still, I feel like, on the forefront. There's very few system integrators in the world who are actually doing this autonomous AI and who can bring these visions, to production. So we've got real autonomous AI agents that are running in production right now on plant floors, that are helping operators and supervisors make better decisions.
mm. And it's even though it's the less kind of I guess less cool kids part of the world. There's a lot of business to be done in the procedural stuff. I remember when
Yeah.
I was writing my fifth book, my publishers kind of rejected the final section, which was 25% of the book, called Process. And it was around system design of procedural operations inside business strategy. And they were
Hmm.
like, "Listen, we read through this and it was boring. We want to cut the thing from the book." And I was like, "It might be boring, but it's where things happen." And I feel the same about supply chains. When you go from manufacturing and production through to logistics and then through into retail and then to the consumer and then so forth, we seem to be constantly interested in the part over on this side, but you can't get there unless something has been produced or manufactured and has actually been.
Right.
I mean, most of the people in business don't necessarily know the multi-trillion-dollar logistics operation that
Hmm.
underpins things. So they don't notice the cargo ships at night, and they
Right.
don't see the things that are being made before they arrive on cargo ships. They don't look at the plants that. And so
Yeah.
are you in a, this is almost a facetious question, but are you constantly in this kind of reassuring narrative to people of like, yeah, it might not be as cool as getting ChatGPT to write me a love letter for my girlfriend, but nonetheless, the device you're holding in your hand has been made by something that was probably generated by an autonomous AI assistant, you know?
Well, I wish it was. I wish that was the truth. To be honest, I mean, the adoption of AI in manufacturing, like I said, is still very much, in its infancy. But yes, when I hold my phone, I know exactly who the manufacturer of that glass is that you probably is probably cracked on your phone and my phone.
Yeah.
But I know exactly who the manufacturer of that is, and I know at a deep level what it took to get that piece of glass on that phone, and that's just one component of a very complex piece of equipment. And so, having worked in this industry for 25 years now, I do have such a great appreciation as I look around. I've been in so many plants, I've seen so many processes. Looking around, I can now kind of reverse engineer how some of these things are made. And I'm like, oh, okay, I got, now I know how all this stuff is. And I have a great appreciation for those supply chains. And I think you're right. We don't think about it, and that's okay. I mean, we don't all have to sit around thinking about these things and appreciating it. But I do think when we saw the disruptions in supply chain that happened over the pandemic, it opened up a lot of people's eyes to, oh, this is it's a very powerful web, it's a very powerful supply chain, but it's also in some ways fragile and delicate. And we're seeing now with tariffs and things like that, whatever your side of it is on it, the effect that these impacts can have, economic and political, and can have on the supply chain. Um, so one of the things though that I have, that I've seen on, having worked in a lot of these manufacturing facilities though, is the evolution of these types of algorithms and things. So if we look at a very fine grain level, if we look at back in the 90s, and even before that, we had the evolution of MRP, so material resource planning, right? And so then ERP systems kind of grew out of MRP, and that was this ability to be able to optimize and predict, kind of just in time, what are the materials I'm going to need, and build rough production schedules, and figure out, work backwards from, here's the orders that I have placed. How do I need to work backwards 6 months, 10 months, to be able to figure out when I need to order these materials, because like you said, they got to be moved by ship and things like that, and then really kind of plan out the work. And so that's been around now for decades, like these types of optimization algorithms, right? And then if you look more on the plant floor, you had optimization algorithms called model predictive control,
Mhm.
right? And so this was where you had these models that could, they were kind of like autopilot on a plane, but they were running the manufacturing equipment. And so they could get to steady state, and they could, even in the face of crosswinds and things like that, to kind of stretch the analogy, they could, keep the machine running, and get to, so, and in some rudimentary ways, they were kind of goal solving and things like that. So autonomous AI then really is, again, if when you put it in those terms, people start to say, oh, okay, I can connect now. I can kind of scaffold out for them, and they can connect the dots and say, okay, this is just another tool. This is the next evolution of tool. It's very capable. It's more capable than those previous tools. And one of the things that we like about it is that it's able to, it's a single tool that we're able to use for a lot of different problems within the manufacturing facility. So I can use this same technology both to optimize a vinyl extrusion line, and we can talk about that here in a second, all the way up to building more optimal production schedules. Now, those model predictive control and linear optimization and MRP, those all are different technologies with different niche operations, right? And you use them for different things. I'm talking about a technology in autonomous AI that I can use to solve all of those problems. And we really like that. Just like evolution, we're kind of lazy, and we want to be able to use the same tools over and over again to solve lots of different problems. And so autonomous AI has that promise, to be able to do that. And it's been proven now over the last couple of years, and that it's been in use and in production, to be able to be very adaptable to a lot of different uses.
Okay, and so for those who are listening or watching who are trying to think what the red thread is between what you're talking of and, let's say, ethical morality in terms of doing the
Hmm.
right thing, or the difference between what's right and wrong. For those who are wondering, I'm going to now pose a question that is transparently attempting to bridge those things together, and
Yeah.
pose the question in this way, which is, um, one could argue that the objective of a system is almost exclusively based on the objective of the operator who has programmed the system to execute on a certain basis or a certain metric. We want you system to achieve this in the cheapest way, or the smallest volume of components used, or the shortest amount of steps between A to Z, and whatever it is. Um, when a system is being applied in the industrial space, um, is there any requirement for the operator to implement any form of moralistic value or any form of decisioning that is, and I'll give an example, that if a system could come up with a solution that was using unsustainable materials, one could argue that that system is less ethical than one that is adherent to a sustainable development goal from the United Nations. Or if a system, and that's a relatively easy analogy, but moving to a more complex one um, is there any consideration needed for an industrial AI that is removing people from the workforce and by eliminating the need for human jobs? And I'm not saying that with any form of bias whatsoever. I'm literally looking at it from a mathematical perspective. Is there any need for an application of ethics that you've seen, or is there no requirement for moralistic principles when it comes to the industrial AI because the organization itself has already got its principles set in advance of that?
Well, so, and there's a lot there to unpack.
Yeah.
So let's address a couple of things that you said there. So one of the things that, in the position I'm in, I get a lot of these questions, right? So, I on these podcasts, and my wife and I will go to parties and things like that, and people like to, kind of press my buttons and say, okay, all right, you're the director of AI, are you putting people out of work, and how can you live with yourself? Okay. So so there's typically the categories of concerns that people have around industrial AI, which is my area of specialty, is typically around three areas. So let's address all of them. The first one is this idea of putting people out of work. So let's that is a myth. So let's go ahead and address that right out of the gate. LNS Research did a study, and in 2019, so right before COVID, in 2019, the average tenure of someone working, now this is for US, someone working in the US manufacturing workforce, the average tenure was 20 years. Okay. And the average time in that position was something like 7 years. 2023, 4 years later, you want to take a guess at what the average tenure of someone working in the manufacturing workforce was? 20 years in 2019. You want to take a shot at what it was in 2023?
No idea. Go for it.
3 years.
Wow.
3 years. So what we have seen, and the average time in position is less than a year, typically around 7 months. What we have seen, and it was COVID, but I mean, COVID accelerated it. We were already starting to see it. But what we're seeing is the baby boomers, who in a lot of ways knew how best to run this equipment, knew how to keep these factories going, knew how to maintain this equipment, are retiring, and not in small numbers, right? In droves. Okay. They're calling it a silver tsunami of these folks as they leave the manufacturing workforce. And behind them, what they've left is folks who, for better, worse, indifferent, you could argue all day till you're blue in the face as to whether it's a good thing or a bad thing, but they've left a workforce that don't want to do these jobs.
Mm.
So they have extremely high turnover. And this is, I mean, I'm telling you, client after client, after every single one of my clients, they're all singing the same song in unison, that we don't have the people that we need to do these jobs. So number one, right out of the gate, we're not putting anyone out of work because they can't get enough people. If they could
Mm.
get enough people, they wouldn't bother with all this AI stuff. They would just go and hire the people and have them do it. Okay.
Mm.
So we can't, I've never been involved in any of these AI projects where there's been a labor reduction, as a workforce reduction. For those people who, and here's an example, vinyl extrusion. So I went and I talked to a plant manager of a vinyl extrusion line up in Canada. And as soon as we sat down and started talking, he said, I've got two guys who are the best in the world at running this vinyl extrusion line. And it's a complex process, right? Again, we take it for vinyl showers curtains, and you know, actually this company makes the vinyl things that will eventually become blood pressure cuffs, like the vinyl
Right.
that goes into blood pressure cuffs. That's what they make. Okay. And we just take it for granted. We don't even think about it, right? But it's a complex process to make this vinyl. And there's a lot of compensating moves. If you turn, you know, the rollers up here, then you got to reduce the heat here, and you got to do all these, you know. So, and he said, I got two guys that are the best in the world at running this line. He said, both of them are less than 5 years from retirement. And he said, I've got no bench. He's like, I've got 6 month, 1 year guys. He's like, I've got high turnover. Nobody wants to do these jobs. For better, worse, indifferent, nobody wants to spend the next 10 years of their life learning how best to run a vinyl extrusion line. We could wish that it wasn't the case, or we can just live with the fact that that is the world that we live in right now. So what do we do? So for him, he's saying it's existential. He either is going to adopt AI, and we've got a process called machine teaching that's part of autonomous AI, where we can actually train the model with the expertise of those SMEs before they leave. We can capture that expertise in silicon so it's never lost, and then we can use that to make his 6 year guy or 6 month guys better. Um, you know, for him, it's existential. He's either going to adopt AI, or he's going to live with the fact that the line's never going to run as well as it will. And so what's that mean? It means, you know, less vinyl for blood pressure cuffs. It means more quality issues. It means, you know, all shortages. It means higher prices. It means all those things, because that's the result when manufacturing grinds to a halt, or when you have major quality issues and things like that. So, okay, so let's address that. We're not putting anyone out of work with this. They don't have enough people to do it. Okay, the second one typically is the concern about, okay, but now you've got AI in this factory. What if it kills somebody? What if it blows up the plant? Well, okay. I mean, the real concerns in that. I mean, yeah, I guess there's a non-zero chance that that could happen. But here's the thing that I typically tell people. Remember that we are training this AI to do something that in the past humans have done. Now we're going to put that same human maybe in charge of running 3 lines. Each one has the AI on, and it's going to oversee that AI or something like that, right?
Mhm.
But ultimately, a human would be doing this job. And so the AI can't do anything the human couldn't do. So if you weren't worried about the human with 2 weeks of training, high turnover, there for
Yeah.
6 months and leaves. If you weren't worried about the human blowing up the plant, I wouldn't worry about the AI. And we can actually constrain the AI to do less than what the human was allowed to do. So we can tell the AI, look, yeah, the human was allowed to run on, you know, in this particular mode, but we don't want you running in that mode. So you can run in modes 1, 3, and 5, but then the human operator will come in and do modes 2 and 4 because they're more complex or whatever. We just don't want to deal with it right now. So we can constrain the operations of the AI. And the third concern that I typically get is the Skynet concern. And I think you've probably talked to enough AI experts at this point to know we're still so far from Skynet. We don't need to worry about that. That is not a real concern. While these AI, I work with them every single day. These AI algorithms are very capable at what they do in a very narrow sense. They are not intelligent. We are not that close to artificial general intelligence. Even you know, as convincing as LLMs are at being smart and intelligent, we're not that close still to artificial general intelligence. So no concerns about Skynet. I'd tell you if I was concerned about it. We're not near that. So those are typically the ethical concerns. Now, the last point you asked about, which was a good one, was, you know, and you know brought up the example of choosing sustainable raw materials versus, you know, unsustainable raw materials or something like that. So again, we go back to ultimately these are tools that are working in, you know, they're working for a company, a corporation, and that corporation is making certain decisions. So this tool is just you know, one in a long line of tools that are making decisions on behalf of that corporation. So ultimately, the decisions of the AI are simply going to reflect the values and decisions that the corporation makes. So if you want corporations to make better decisions, I mean, vote with your dollar, vote with your feet, boycotts, whatever you want to do. You know, I'm not so big on the regulatory heavy hand. I'd rather see more of a bottom up type of approach to that, but whatever, you know, change the minds and hearts and minds of those corporations, and that's all great. And if you want to work to change their values, that's fine. But this AI is not going to do anything that doesn't align with the values of whatever company is implementing it. So
Yeah, and this is I'm glad that we've covered that point because to many people they look at these machines as separate to the organization or the operator of the machines. Whereas what I've witnessed, and I'm the chief executive founder of an AI firm myself, but from working in business for 3.5 decades and being involved with applying digital strategies into analog businesses, the starting point, like from a first principles perspective, the values of the company are the thing that is mirrored in the execution of the digital technology, as opposed to the digital technology having a value that is imagined in and of itself. And I think that
Right.
there's a marketing aspect of ChatGPT to some extent, which is when Sam Altman and others say that there's this is becoming so smart, it's coming up with its own decision making and so forth. Part of that is to flex the muscles of something that and everyone who's watched the last 35, 40 hours of ethics TV will know that my view is that for the biggest emperor without clothes of this industry is that for something to be malevolent or benevolent, it would need to have emotional intelligence, which it patently doesn't have. It has logical
Right.
intelligence. And for something to be hateful, it needs to understand the concept of hate and the motivations of hate, which also means the motivations of greed. So some of the most interesting examples of conversations have been around with psychologists around what it would require for a system to have hate inside it. From an industrial AI perspective, saying the program mode of 1, 3, and 5 is the narrow aperture of execution. Modes 2 and 4 are actually they're outside of the program, is the same as putting into a spreadsheet only the numbers 1, 3, and 5 and saying, tell me
Right.
which numbers you can see. And the system goes 1, 3, and 5. It can't conceive of number 2 and 4 because you haven't entered it into a cell.
Hmm.
And so it's been, I'm, even though I'm nowhere near industrial AI, I become you at the dinner parties when you're not there because I am in
Oh,
AI.
good.
Yeah, so I still get the questions. I still
Yeah.
have my analogy that I use, which is slightly, I think is not as, politically correct as yours, is that in the UK, we realised that a lot the best plasterers and the best painters were of certain nationalities that weren't British historically. There's a lot of immigrants, and people were saying to me, it's just so upsetting that these Polish people are doing all these tiling jobs. And I say, well, I tell you why they're doing all the tiling jobs. It's because none of the Brits can be bothered. They're in the pub. So
Right.
if we weren't so bloody lazy, then and we wanted to actually learn a trade, then we would have kept the jobs. The people
Right.
who've come over from overseas are doing the jobs because we didn't want to do them. So
Right.
we should look internally at our own accountability. So it's the less politically correct point of what you're saying, and in fact, you've got the stats to back yours up.
And I will say this too, again, they can't get enough people to do these jobs. And so, but ultimately too, these aren't okay. Why is that? As you just mentioned, right? Classically, the kind of the heavy labor type of jobs were the ones that went to quote unquote more blue collar folks, right? So whether it's laying tile or plumbing or landscaping or they're tough jobs, bricklaying, where you're out in the sun all day, right? So okay, so now we've evolved as a society, and now the jobs that are kind of um seemed or are kind of perceived as redundant and not exciting and are these manufacturing jobs, right? And in a lot of ways, you're standing there for a long period of time and you're looking at the same thing and you're moving these knobs and you're hitting these buttons and things are happening, and it's maybe not the most exciting job in the world. And so, from that standpoint, too, I see AI as an opportunity to make the lives of those people that work at these plants better, right? So we've got folks who are still doing dangerous jobs, right? I mean, you've got OSHA in the United States, and you've got these types of worker safety type of movements and groups and things like that. But there's lots of workers all around the world who are working in very unsafe conditions. Let's leverage AI to get them out of those positions. Let's have them do things that add true value to a company and make them feel like they're excited to come into work every day because they're actually being productive and adding to the value, in the world. And that's rewarding in and of itself. People want to do rewarding jobs.
Mm.
And so the examples that I typically give is that, street lighter was a job. There was a time in this country when, you had street lighters, and then when we had electric street lights, those jobs went away, but no one lamented the loss of those jobs, right? Elevator operator was a job. There was somebody who actually pulled the lever to move the elevator up and down, and nobody even thinks about it today when they hit a elevator button and sheds a tear for those elevator operators that were put out of work, right?
Yeah.
Because the reality of it is that as those jobs go away, new jobs open up and new opportunities open up and new roles open up within society. And that's just the natural evolution of society. And so, um, yes, I mean, absolutely. There's so many opportunities, and AI is going to continue to create new jobs that we can't even imagine right now. As those some of those old repetitive jobs, are automated, and that's a good thing, and that's what we want. And when we look at the 40-hour work week, that didn't always exist. Like, we
Mm.
just take it for granted now that there's a 40-hour work week, but automation is what brought that about. And the industrialization of these processes is what brought that about. And that extra leisure, like, that's something we've earned as a civilization, and we should want that, and we should want more of that. They're talking about a 32-hour work week. God bless, let's bring it on, right?
Yeah.
But the only way we're going to get there is if we adopt new technology, and AI, again, it's just one of those. But yeah, it's an important one in that progress.
Yeah, I've always wondered. I think one of the ways of demonstrating the importance of automation is to get someone who doesn't see the point to go and live on a working farm for a weekend
Mm,
or a
hmm.
week, and and then within 72 hours, you will worship the combine harvester. You will worship the thing that the machinery does, because farming without machinery sucks. And
Yeah.
so it's yeah, the so I have a final question, which is a lateral one, but only because I love part of your bio around the fact that you're a roller coaster addict. I want to draw the line, the red thread between the fearlessness or the fearless energy of the roller coaster addict, and how that applies to the world in which you work. Where's that line? I can't make that red thread.
Well, and part of that is probably the fact that I'm pretty straight laced. I got a wife, I got 3 kids, I've got a house in the suburbs, and I work in an office job, and it's fun and exciting from the standpoint of they're very cool challenges that I solve, and working with these manufacturings and getting to walk through these plants and stuff. But yeah, I mean, I'm a little bit of a thrill seeker on the side, and so you strap me into a roller coaster, doesn't matter how high or how big or how fast, and I am on board. My wife and I, we met at 18 in college, and that was one of the first things we bonded over, was our love of roller coasters. And we live in Ohio, and Cedar Point is one of the big roller coaster hubs in America, and it's right up the road from us in Sandusky, Ohio. So we bonded over that, and we just have always done that. So yeah, I mean, bring it on. We love them big, fast, and and
So
scary.
and so so the argument is that the arguably the tedium of a desk job, office work, is counteracted with the rebellion of the roller
There you
coaster.
go. There you
Okay.
go. Yep. Yep. And I've even gotten to, through RoviSys and some of the cool things we've done. I've even gotten to ride in a race car before. And so I've done some of these thrill seeking kind of things before. And yeah, that's kind of my outlet, I guess, a little bit. And the funny thing is I am absolutely terrified of heights, but I will get on a roller coaster any day.
Well, okay, so now you're speaking my language. So what I wasn't going to say was that my fear of heights is such that I can't reconcile the danger of being on a roller coaster, and as soon as I read a report about a roller coaster gone wrong, I go, there you go, this is why. Although I don't even need to know the statistical difference between car accidents to roller coaster accidents, and
Oh yeah.
I'm in
Yeah.
the car every day with probably 10,000x risk than a roller coaster
Yes.
ride. But for
Yeah.
me, my irrational fear is the other way around, right? So I
Your
guess
chance of
that.
dying on the drive to the amusement park is so much higher. And part of it too is I'll tell you something interesting. The same controllers that they use to run the factories are the controllers they use to run the roller coasters. And I'm very comfortable with those controllers. So I know exactly what's happening behind the scenes and how those things work. So it doesn't bother me at
Ah,
all.
okay. So that's the thread. You see, any good interviewer would have drawn that thread, and I could, yeah, John, I should try harder, John. So I can see that link. Okay, listen, Brian. Thank you so much for joining. I guess the links that are in the bio are where people should go. But is there any other? What in closing would you like to, to say to people watching and listening? Out of the, so far there's been 1/3 of a million viewers of Ethics TV, believe it or not. So what would you like to say to people in closing that they should remember or they should do next or look into, or what would you like to close with?
Well, so let's look at two different kind of groups of folks who might be listening. One is if you're a manufacturer and you'd like, to learn more about these things that I'm talking about, please reach out to me on LinkedIn. Like the company's RoviSys, RoviSys. We've been around for 36 years, 1,600 engineers globally. We're a great resource for those folks who actually make things in the world. And the other group would be people who aren't familiar with manufacturing in the industrial space. And if you're interested at all, I'll tell you what, I went to school for a computer science degree from the University of Akron. I always wanted to be a programmer. Beyond that, I really didn't care what else I did. I just wanted to be a programmer and knew nothing about manufacturing before I came into this world. And 25 years later, I can tell you it is an absolutely fascinating world of manufacturing. There are so many just little rabbit holes that you can go and build a whole career here. So, I guess, as a little bit of a shill for the manufacturing industry generally, look into it. It's a great career, and we're always going to need it. Like it's one of those careers that's never going to go away. Manufacturing is never going to go away, and it will give you a much deeper appreciation for all the things that you kind of take advantage of in your life. So,
Brilliant. Brian, what a brilliant close. It's like you do this for a living as well, right? It's like you've spoken at a few things.
I've done it a couple times.
I'm getting that vibe. Thanks so much for joining, man. I really appreciate it.
Thanks,
Cheers.
Jonathan.
Thanks, man.